Well, happy quarter two, everyone. Great to be back with you. You've got Stuart Skolton and Brian Jarosinski with you today for the quarterly installment of the WellCents Show. Glad you're with us. As we kick off today, just wanted to put a couple housekeeping items out there. Number one, we love the engagement. So if you've been on the show before, you know that we love to get to questions that everyone has as we get through our agenda items today. We've got a lot of great topics lined up, some current events we want to talk about. And if you have feedback, questions, we love to hear it. So ask those questions live. We'll get to you as we go through this. And then the second housekeeping item today is for those of you that are seeking WellCents points from your organization for the attendance today, make sure you complete the WellCents Show survey. So that's going to be sent out following the show, and you can use the employee passphrase empowered to get that credit. So remember, it's that employee passphrase is empowered. So as we kick off today, just a couple of fun things to talk about. We want to, again, give you a little bit of a crypto update. That's obviously been a hot topic, I think, to start the year with those crypto ETFs going live. I think the latest statistics on that, 42% were up. And Brian and I were not bullish on the crypto play. Time will tell, as we like to say on that. But right now, if you got in crypto when the ETFs went live, you're pretty happy. And then we're also going to talk about a little bit about the election cycle. So I think that's the big news right now. Obviously, election cycle, there's some uncertainty around, who's going to be the president for the next 4 years. And so that can create some uncertainty in the markets. The markets love certainty. And if we don't have that certainty, then that's a lot of times one of the things that plays into volatility. So we've got a fun agenda today. I'm going to kick it over to Brian, my partner for the market review, and we'll dive in.
Yeah, thanks everyone for joining. It's always a pleasure to do these and get you guys as much valuable information as we possibly can in an unbiased manner, so you can take that back and hopefully use it to better your financial situation, your household, and all those things. So, market updates, as Stuart was alluding to. Look, 2023, right? This is our first quarter 2024 WellCents meeting. So, 2023 was a good year, right? What can you say when the S&P was up by almost 30%? Mid small caps were up 5 to 10%. Dow Jones, that index was up 20%. So anyone who was looking at their 401k statements at the end of the fourth quarter, at the end of the first quarter that just passed here recently, everyone should be pretty happy, right? If you were invested, really, you could have thrown a dart really at any given large cap mutual fund in the last year, certainly the last couple quarters, and you were doing okay. Other things that Stuart was talking about, obviously the cryptocurrency has been big in the news for really a decade now, but the SEC approved a couple what's called exchange traded funds for Bitcoin and other access to those things. And those things have done quite well. Year to date, since they went live, I think January 11th, they're up 43%. So, do you go throw all your money in it? Absolutely not, right? But it's an asset class, right? It's something that we talk about our clients with diversifying, and now we have a little bit more of an effective way to get there. We just passed March Madness. There's some fun facts on March Madness. I pulled it up about $17 billion is lost in corporate profits on every March Madness. About 25% of people call out of work for this reason or the other to go watch the games. But what you could say we lost in corporate profits, which this is a common theme every year, sports betting is legal, right? So you're seeing that on every news station across the country. DraftKings, for example, is up another 17% this year. I think there was about $4 billion in bets just on the March Madness tournament. So there's pros and cons. But again, as Stuart mentioned, we're entering an election year, and 82% of elections back to 1928, the stock market's been positive. We've only had really one bad year, and that was 2008 in the financial crisis with Obama. But historically speaking, people, to Stuart's point, the market likes certainty, but people like change, and they feel like a new president sometimes, or a change of a regime, or in this case, a flipping of the page to the next one. Usually ends up making people feel happy, and they go and spend, and we see how we do. But that's the market update. I think we got a good tailwind with election years, usually pretty good. We're going to talk about Fed and the interest rates. I'll kick that back to you, Stuart. But as rates hopefully tend to drop, and the Fed at this point, we might not even have until 2025, they say, even though they projected possibly 3 this year a few months ago. So we'll see how that plays out. But I'll kick it back to Stuart. And again, make sure you guys are popping the questions in the chat, because we like to, shift this from informative to really getting some Q&A situated for you guys.
Yeah, well, we'll talk about interest rates really quick, and then we'll get back to our first question here about cryptocurrency. I think the Fed Chairman Powell somewhat put his foot in his mouth earlier in the year, saying, "Hey, we see rates coming down, or at least trending down over the middle part of the year." Last we heard now that's probably not going to happen. So we're expecting rates to stay at least where they're at. Probably not going to be increased, as inflation seems like it's a bit more under control now. But the consensus is that rates are probably not going to come down this year. And if they do, it would be very much towards the tail end of the year. So we're still early part of the year. I think it's safe to assume that, hey, if you're in some of those high yield savings accounts, those CDs, those money market instruments, you're probably going to continue to get a really nice yield just on your cash if you're in one of those types of accounts. So it's one of the things that we've really emphasized a lot over the last several shows is just good cash management. So if you're not taking advantage of a high yield savings account, a CD, or a money market fund, if you've got money just sitting in a brick and mortar financial institution, definitely be looking at some of those cash management instruments. If you're not getting between 4 and 5% on your money right now, you're losing value. Frankly, you're getting taken to the cleaners. You're being fleeced by your bank, because remember, your bank's taking your money, they're lending it out to somebody else for a 7.5% mortgage, and they're giving you 1%. So make sure you're capitalizing on that. Good cash management is king right now. It's paramount. And I think that's just it's going to continue to be a trend, I would say, for the rest of the year. So let's get to the first question here. So best resources to learn about cryptocurrency. And now I'm going to just put this out here. I'm not a crypto expert. I don't invest in crypto personally, but there's a lot of materials and resources out there because these funds now are approved. You can actually do a lot more of your own due diligence on one of the more common websites. Morningstar, for example, is where you can go. A lot of great information on different funds is available on Morningstar. It's a easy resource, a free resource that you can utilize. If you're looking to see some performance, some analytics, I would say start there with any of the crypto type questions as well. Brian, you maybe got anything else more specific?
Yeah, look, for the longest time, the biggest problem with cryptocurrency was, how do I buy it? Right. I mean, before there was only a couple handful of brokerages you could even buy Bitcoin, Ethereum, Dogecoin, all this stuff. Coinbase was probably the main one. Again, we had all these things like FTX, and we all obviously know what happened with some of these, with all the lawsuits and litigation and embezzlement. So it's certainly very less. The whole idea behind crypto, right, is it's on a general ledger, and doesn't have to go through a bank, and it's not as regulated. So that's good and bad, right? So you can't have the big banks kind of in the way, but at the same time, there's not a lot of regulation in it. So Coinbase was the big one. I mean, Coinbase is probably a good resource. Money.com, Kiplinger, you're independent. I mean, no one's really truly independent anymore. They're all still getting ads and buy-ins from various carriers, but look around, look at various publications that say they're independent. And again, utilize us. We don't have a horse in the race, right? So we're here to help you and have you guys throw stuff off of us, and then give you back our findings.
Yeah, that's good advice. That's really good advice. Got a couple good questions coming in, and I think we'll address them a little bit later, more along the lines of retirement income planning. But just right off the top, I think that when people think about things like cryptocurrency, or they think about real estate investing, or whatever it is, remember the key to a diversified portfolio is not having all of your eggs in one basket. And so that really should tie into your financial plan. And really, you're not going to have one primary vehicle. There's different account types, different asset locations where you're going to have money. But then also you're going to have that money in those different baskets invested in different things. So crypto could be a good place to maybe put a small sleeve of your portfolio. Maybe you own a rental property, or you're just investing money into a real estate mutual fund that's, in and of itself investing in hard or backed real estate. All of that's really going to tie into your retirement plan. And so when we get into retirement planning, I think it's easy and it's commonplace to see the headlines that say, hey, you need to have $1 million in order to retire. That's great for clicks. But the reality is that the average person's situation is going to be vastly different from their coworker or their person next door. So make sure when you're running these retirement needs calculations, as we like to call them, you're sitting down with a planner, someone who's looking at your situation, what you're making, what your lifestyle is going to look like into and through retirement, and then almost back into the number that you need to have in order to be able to retire. So I think it's a great question. We'll unpack it a little bit more as we go in. But I thought just a fun question for the group. It's tax time. Hopefully everyone's got their returns in. And I think a lot of people are getting at least hopefully a little bit of a refund. So we thought it'd be fun to ask the group, what are you doing with your tax refund this year? So, let's get the chat going. Let's see some fun things. I mean, maybe some of you are putting it towards the vacation budget. Maybe it's a little bit more into your IRA for next year at this point. Maybe you're buying a new computer or TV, but what are you doing with your tax refund? I don't know, Brian, did you get any money back this year?
Yeah.
What was that money going to? I know you got a little one in the house.
I'll raise my hand and go first with that question. Again, I like to joke with all of our clients. We talk, do you work in the private sector? Do you work in the public sector? We're all government employees, right? At the end of the day, the amount of taxes we pay the government in various ways, shapes, and forms between local, federal, and state tax, it's pretty absorbent. I personally did not get any money back, so I was on the other side of the coin where I had to cut a nice check by April 15th here. So that's where I have to, I prep that stuff ahead of time. But I can tell you, working with a lot of clients, plenty of clients did end up getting a lot of money back. And we have these conversations with our clients all the time. Where do we want to put these dollars and that are coming back to us? And a couple areas right off the top, as we've gone through this, the inflation's been the biggest problem really for most families, assuming minus any kind of job loss and such that some people are having to deal with in the recent economy. But assuming nothing changed with your job, the inflation's what's killing everybody, right? If you look at some of the numbers between energy, food, car insurance, home insurance, those four categories alone, you could argue are up 20, 45% in inflation the last year and a half. You also could figure, we'll talk more about the housing market later. Housing market usually goes up 4 or 5% a year. In the last 3 years, there have been many areas, myself included, in the DC area, homes have gone up about 20% a year in value on paper as far as selling it and someone else buying it, and they're getting those numbers. So and then the other thing is the credit card debt. Credit card debt went from $50 billion in the fourth quarter to over $1 trillion nationwide. And at these interest rates and credit card companies' ability to charge you 25, 30%, for my clients and participants in our 401k plans, when they get tax refund back, first off, if they have any of that high interest debt, that's where it's got to go, right? We got to get off the ledger of and being a creditor for some of those credit card companies and get back to a position where we're paying off the credit card every single month and we're just getting our points and we're not paying any fees and interest charges. But Stuart, you tell me, did you get money back on yours, or were you owe like I was?
I was enough in the positive as far as a refund. With a few $100, I can maybe take the wife out to a nice steak dinner. So that's probably what I'm doing. So I balanced my taxes, I think, pretty effectively throughout the year. Ideally, you actually want to hold on to more of your money. So getting a huge refund is not necessarily a good thing. It means that the government had your money for longer. You weren't able to put that money to work for maybe in a money market fund or any type of short-term investment. You didn't have that money throughout the year. So I always try to get my tax return as low as possible, because that means I got to hold on and control more of my money throughout the year. So I think it's a nice dinner for my family, and that's about it. We move on. I like seeing some of the questions we have coming in, or just some of the feedback. We've got people, looks like vacations are a popular thing.
Yeah.
Like, get the tax refund. Yeah, take your son on a vacation. That's awesome, Kaylin. And then, paying off something, like paying off a vacation. I think that's another great approach. Like, if you took a vacation last year, maybe you were making some payments. I mean, that goes back to Brian, your point, pay off some of those things that you might have financed and use it towards that. So you're not paying any kind of an interest rate on that by carrying it on the books for too long. So moral of the story, I think, is try to minimize your tax refund as much as possible. You probably don't want to owe, but if you can avoid some of those big refunds, means you held on to more of your money throughout the year.
Yeah. It depends how you look at it. And then, to Heather's point, on the cruise to Alaska, just on a personal note, my parents took a cruise to Alaska 2 years ago and they loved it. I saw the pictures, the videos, so I'm not sure if this was one you already had or it's upcoming, but You'll either have a great time, or I'm sure you had a great time. I've heard that's a wonderful trip.
Nice, nice. Well, it looks like we're getting another question here on property inheritance. What to do with the money if you sell it. I'll take this one. I think this is a different kind of conversation. I'm having it with a lot more individuals that are getting close to retirement, and either they're inheriting property from a parent or family that's deceased, or they're considering downsizing their existing home, or maybe they raised a family. So I'll kind of tie this into the real estate investing conversation. I think now more than ever before, if you own a property or you've held a property that's either been in the family via your parents and maybe you're inheriting it, or you've had the home for a really long time, it makes a lot of sense right now to look at exploring rental options. Because if you bought a property even 3 to 5 years ago and you are just looking at how the real estate market has performed the last 5 years, you're sitting on a pile of equity and probably a very low interest rate. If you were in it and refinanced it during COVID, or even before then, you purchased it. And even if you never refinanced it, you probably are at a rate in the 4% range. The reality is, if you have that position, it makes a lot more sense in a lot of cases, if you're thinking about downsizing, to just rent your home out. That was the family home. Take the profit that you're making now on renting your house out, and then put that towards a downsized or smaller space that's maybe more functional in retirement, if you're looking to go that route. Same thing with inheriting property. Do you sell it? Maybe if you need the cash, but in a lot of cases, it makes sense to create some cash flow and turn that into some type of a rental. And chances are you probably have plenty of margin built in to even consider hiring a property manager. So Brian and I know we're really bullish on real estate, kind of passion projects of ours with the dabbling in the rental market game. I think it makes sense, especially in the inheritance place. If you're inheriting real estate, consider what the long-term cash flow options look like, and maybe consider renting it out. I don't know, Brian, you got anything else?
Yeah, so let's talk real estate market for a minute. So the real estate market has gone through a whole bunch of issues in the last 3 years. First thing is, if you're on this call and you own property, it probably doesn't even really matter where in the country you own it. Certain areas obviously have grown a little bit more than others, but in the last 2 years, the home values have basically gone pretty directly up, about 20% year over year in a lot of places. That's not common. So if you're sitting on property, and that as a property owner, you're in good shape. If you're looking to buy right now, it's a little bit tougher, right? You got 30-year mortgage rates at 7-8%, 15-year rates maybe 7%, and your national average of a normal 2-3 bedroom home is around $450,000. So the biggest thing we always talk about clients is taxation. So again, remember, you get taxed on the money you make. You get taxed on when you buy certain things. You get taxed to hold those certain things, like property insurance, property taxes. So we get taxed 4 or 5. We get our dollars taxed 4 or 5 times. So to the question, if I inherit a nice property, depending on how you inherited it, there might be a step up in basis, meaning that the person that passed it to you, maybe they bought it for 200 and you got it when they passed and it was 500. Depending on the relationship, you probably absorb that 500,000, so there's no taxation. So things like that, depends what you want to do with it. But and to Stuart's point, rental's a great idea depending on your financial situation. A lot of people are doing what's called 1031 exchanges. So they take the value of that asset and they put it into something of equal or greater value, and there's no taxation on the gains. If there are gains there, you have to pay taxes on. So again, every situation is different. Stuart and I will probably say that 50 times in these things over the year, but reach out to us, right? Like, we just need more data, more information. What's the situation? What do you need funds for? Give me the financial profile, and then we can kind of help steer you in the right direction. But again, taxes are the biggest, I don't want to say the SCAM word, but they're the biggest detriment. They're probably the biggest detriment beyond not saving and investing as far as wealth creation goes. So any way we can circumvent that in a legal way, that's extremely, extremely important. And that's where a lot of people, just not knowing the area, that's where they fall short.
Yeah, another fun thing to do, and a conversation I have with people, is if you're looking at maybe inheriting a home or you have a home, go on Zillow and they'll even give you a rental projection for the property. So you can very quickly just do some of the quick math on, if you're wondering, hey, I'm inheriting this property, or maybe I'm considering downsizing, type the address in on Zillow. you scroll down a ways and they'll give you some rough rental projections, or even better, go look on kind of the local boards, Zillow, Redfin. Look at what places are renting for in your area, similar bedrooms, bathrooms, and get an idea of what your all-in cost is. If you're picking up a mortgage or assuming it or still paying a mortgage versus what the property is going to rent for. And so kind of back into the numbers that way. So those are some things that Brian and I obviously do for clients, and really bake it into the whole financial plan and say, hey, does this make sense? Is it worth, selling this if we're investing it somewhere else? Or is it something that's really going to help your cash flow as you move on through retirement? So
yeah, the other aspect is people always talk about, again, it's kind of preached to us in school, and it's really a misnomer and factually incorrect that your home is your biggest asset. A home is not an asset. When you take into account your mortgage, your interest, it's an enjoyable asset. It's not a wealth creating asset unless you hold it for 30 plus years. Again, all the costs, the carry costs of the house, the plumbing, the HVAC, the water heater, the driveway repaving, the landscaping, the electrical, all the things that you have to throw into your house over time to upkeep it. And there's no rental income coming in unless you're renting out a room or a basement or a pool house or something. That's different. But when you run the numbers, if you live in a house for 30 years, it's an enjoyable asset, right? Meaning you have family over, you have parties, you can make it your own. That's the enjoyability asset part of a home. But from a wealth creation, usually about 30 years from what you've spent in interest to the bank and taxes and all the upkeep fees, you about break even. So a lot of people kind of miss that sometimes because they don't add up all these little things. I had roofers and plumbers in my house last week, and I'm $2,000 less for it, right? It's just things like that are going to come up in the house that people just kind of forget that's a housing cost where you're renting, you're calling someone, and it's all taken care of. And the other aspect is earlier this year, many of you may have seen the National Association of Realtors passed a $416 million litigation lawsuit about commissions for buying and selling real estate agents. So that's supposed to go live here in June, July. And instead of paying the normal 5-6% commission, now that's going to have to be negotiated between the buying and the selling folks. I won't go into details. That's a whole seminar by itself. But between rates and the high values of homes and then this new realtor issue, it's gonna make it very, very difficult, if it's not already more difficult than it is now, to get yourself into a new property.
Let's take a couple questions. So I think we've got a good one from Heather here about rollovers. I think a lot of us have been in situations where maybe we've had a retirement plan at an old job or an old employer, and now we've started work somewhere else. And it's, that question that a lot of people ask themselves, okay, what now? What do I do with my old retirement plan? A lot of times you are going to be notified. So you'll get an email or some type of communication from the old record keeper. So that would be the institution holding your funds, holding your money. And they're going to give you some different choices. They're going to let you know you can leave it where it's at if you wanted to just keep it in that old retirement plan. You can roll it over to a new 401k with your new employer, or you can roll it over into an IRA with a bank or other financial institution. So at the end of the day, as long as you're not taking money out, you're not cashing out a retirement plan, you can avoid a lot of the negative tax consequences and penalties. Really depends on your situation. So I think for a lot of people, I really try to advise consolidation. And what I mean by that is it's very difficult as companies change hands. There's a lot of M&A activity, retirement plans close, they switch carriers. So your money can be moved around quite a lot if it's not in a place where you're able to track it. So maybe your most current employer or an IRA. So I think for a lot of individuals, it makes sense. Always consolidate forward or consolidate into an IRA if you're working with an advisor and maybe you have a more custom strategy built out around that. So if you're looking for more investment options, more flexibility, more control, an IRA is a great way to go. If you're fairly early on in your career and you're switching jobs maybe a few times in your 20s to really get settled and dig in, I think it makes more sense to just keep rolling it into your most current 401k. But try to avoid having 3 to 5 or however many old 401ks floating around, because it is tougher to keep track of that money. That'd be my advice on that. Brian, you want to grab a couple other questions here?
Yeah. Well, let's see. We got Uncle Biff here. My wife inherited cash assets in Canada. So great, phenomenal question. I would bet you Stuart and I would both punt this one solely because we'll tell you where we're good at and where we're not. But I have a lot of clients that live internationally and have international assets like yourself. And really the biggest thing that you need in that situation is a good international CPA slash attorney to be able to help figure out what kind of assets they are. You said they're cash assets, but bringing them in and the taxation implications that go to that. When you're talking about taxation, you just need a really good international CPA that specifies, obviously specifically Canada and the United States. Let's see, we got what's the maximum catch-up amount per year for a Roth IRA if you're over 50. So right now in 2024, Stuart, correct me if I'm wrong, but if you're under 50, it's 7,000, and if you're over 50 or you're turning over 50 or you're turning 50 this year, it's you get that extra $1,000 catch-up. So it's $8,000.
Yep, it's accurate.
And is it better to pay off debts versus, I'm not sure I'm understanding your question as far as putting it in the 401k or paying off debts? Depends what the debts are, right? You got credit card.
Yeah, I think if we're talking credit cards, I think the
IRA and car loan it as slow as you can. If it's credit cards at 25%, right? We're with the whole Dave Ramsey.
Yeah, so it looks like we might have lost Brian here for a second, but as far as paying off debts, credit cards, something you definitely want to prioritize. I think one of the mistakes I see people make is maybe rush to pay their home off. I know it's sometimes a goal for a lot of people. Hey, how do we remove the financing on our home as we head into retirement? From a budgeting standpoint and just from a cash management standpoint, your mortgage being at probably the lowest interest rate of all the debt you're going to have, it makes more sense to maybe even just keep paying that in retirement versus saying, hey, we're going to cash out a 401k or an IRA and get hit with taxes to then pay that off all at once. So I think in a lot of cases, depending on what the debt is, that's really where you want to prioritize it. Prioritize that high interest rate debt first. And then you kind of work backwards through, maybe the car loans, and then maybe the home loan is the last thing you're really prioritizing because it's seen as more of a fixed expense. So looks like we had another couple questions here, some just around risk. So high yield savings accounts, are there other options that don't have high risk? So I think with high yield savings accounts, think of them as FDIC insured, almost like bank instruments where you can invest that money and you're just getting an interest payment for it. So the institution's taking that money, they're lending it out to somebody else. And as I alluded to at the very start of the call, this is a great way to recapture some of that interest that the bank is probably keeping from you or pocketing for themselves if you're with a brick and mortar financial institution. So high yield savings accounts still give you that FDIC insurance. They're just giving you a higher interest rate. So a couple of the big ones right now that have great yields are SoFi. You probably maybe recognize them from the Rams stadium. Big player in the high yield savings account space. Their rates are right now around 5% still. And then a lot of the credit card companies, believe it or not, like the Amexes, the Discovers, those are in the we'll call it the 4.25% range for high yield savings accounts as well. CDs are going to give you a little bit more of a locked in component. So I think that's a blessing and a curse with CDs. When you're in a CD, you're not getting the interest till the end of the term. So if you purchase a 1-year CD, you're locked in that account. You're getting a stated interest rate when that CD matures. And it doesn't really matter what happens with the interest rate environment during that 1-year period because you care less. You're just getting your payment locked in at the end of the year. And then you have to see where rates are at that point. So if you're looking for more liquidity, if maybe you want to invest that money into something else, I think that a high yield savings account's a lot better way to go because you're not locked in. You're getting your payments monthly. And then if it's something where you're saying, hey, I think rates are going to be going down in the near future. I don't need this money and I want to be risk-free for a period of time. That's when a CD probably makes the most sense. So looks like Brian's back. I don't know, Brian, did you want to talk about HSAs a little bit?
Yeah, my internet dropped. What timing? Sorry about that. So HSAs, man, I don't know what I missed, but HSAs are pretty much the best vehicle you can go into. There is no other vehicle that exists where it's pre-tax going in. So there's the tax deduction up front. and it's tax-free on the back end, so long as it's being used for some type of a medical expense from long-term care premiums, Medicare premiums, which I think we'll talk about a little bit as well later in the call. But HSAs are a phenomenal investment. Especially if you're young and you're in great health, you really should, if you have options at your company with a high deductible HSA plan, then you absolutely should do it. And even if you're not in good health and you go to the doctor a lot and you got some things going on, it still can make sense. It's less likely to, but again, the cliche, it really depends on the situation. But again, for those of you who haven't utilized it, me personally, I max out my HSA every year. I have for, I'm 40 now. I've been doing that for a decade and a half. Good amount of money there that I earmark for, way down the line in retirement, medical expenses.
But if you break your leg paying softball, then obviously there could be a bigger out-of-pocket that you're paying, Brian. So why would I be in an HSA account and I'm devil's advocate here, right?
Yeah.
And I'm in an HSA account too. But
yeah.
Hey, you break your leg, you're going to have a lot higher out-of-pocket. So what's the thought process there?
That's correct. But I mean, well, that's like the MetLife commercial, the what ifs in life. I mean, I don't plan to break my leg. So obviously it can happen. But just because you have money in an HSA doesn't mean you have to use it to pay the deductibles and your out-of-pocket maximum. You can pay that out of your credit card account or your checking or savings account most times, and you keep the receipts. And then when you go to use your HSA in the future, as long as you have those receipts, you can use those receipts for withdrawals in the future out of that HSA. It's a kind of a well-known backdoor way to get money out of the account for other things, but you just have to be very detailed on keeping records and receipts to be able to do that. So, what you never know if you're going to have a year where you have some medical conditions come up and you have to blow through your out-of-pocket max. But even if that does happen, that doesn't, even if, and you have an HSA, it doesn't mean you have to use it. You could still fund those expenses from another source.
Yeah, that's good. That's a good point. Let's talk a little bit about Medicare, Brian. So I know this is maybe more of a topic for people that are getting closer to age 65.
Yeah.
Maybe you're starting to explore your Medicare options. They do vary a little bit by state. I don't know. What should people be thinking about with the HSA piece? And this kind of goes hand in hand with Social Security, which I'll cover a little bit. Obviously, it's a separate program, but people are typically thinking about Medicare as they kind of transition into retirement, get off their employer plan. But then Social Security is usually something we're talking to people about in their mid 60s as well. So Brian, why don't you kind of lead off, give the Medicare, Medigap 30,000-foot view for the folks on the call?
Yeah. So first off, I mean, we give, Stuart and myself, we give a whole slew of different seminars to our groups, and Social Security and Medicare, they're their own seminars. And really, honestly, you could break either one of those into 3 separate seminars with how much information is involved in all 3 of them. But for example, every year Medicare and Me comes out. It's a handbook that's put out on Medicare.gov. And I think it's like 130 pages now. Don't quote me. It's something, and it's somewhere in the hundreds, and it's an 8% font, or 8 font. Like, it's the amount of information. There may be 20 people on the planet who actually know all that's in there. So it's very tough to navigate through it. Right. But again, high level, Medicare is, what we pay FICA tax for. We're paying that every single year for Social Security and for Medicare. And it's our national health care, right? Once we hit 65. So if we're not lucky enough to work for the government, even though we all kind of work for the government, but if we're not lucky enough to work for the government and have health care benefits that continue with us through retirement, certain school systems, certain private companies, but it's very rare. 90+% of Americans are having to jump onto Medicare, and they're ill prepared to understand how it works. So us at NFP, just like Stuart said with something else, I am in no way a Medicare expert, but I certainly know enough to be dangerous and know when I need to get my clients to the NFP person that is a Medicare specialist on our team and start those conversations. But I will say, from the financial planning perspective, Medicare has costs, like everything has costs. And the cost that you pay on Medicare, the premiums on Part B, which is your prescription coverage, which is your doctor physician coverage, and then Part D, which is your prescription coverage, those are income banded. So it's based on your modified adjusted gross income, but from 2 years prior to you retiring. A lot of people don't understand that. And why that's important is people usually make the most money the years right before they retire, right? You normally make more money as you get older, not less. So in order to adequately plan to try to mitigate your income. So again, for example, I just pulled the numbers. If you make under 206,000 modified adjusted gross income and you file jointly, your Part B premiums are 174. If you're making good dollars between you or your spouse, it could be as high as 600 a month. And same thing for Part B or Part D, it could be $0 or close to $100. So these are kind of things that come into planning. We often hear, Brian, when should I start planning for Medicare, and switching health cares? Really 2 years before you retire, without a doubt. At least where again, things can change in 2 years. But if you think there's a chance you're going to retire in 2 years, you want to, and you're going to be at least 65 in those 2 years where you're eligible. That's when you get with a Stuart and myself and a independent Medicare specialist. I get robocalls. I'm 40 years old. I must get them twice a week about signing up for a new Medicare program. I'm like, I don't know where you guys are buying your lists from, but you got to do better. Like, stop, geez. But there's a lot of, look, it's a commissionable product. You got Medicare Advantage, you got Medigap policies, and these are all things that a lot of people get because Medicare has a lot of, I call it Swiss cheese. There's a lot of holes in coverages that are missed. Long-term care, there's deductibles, there's co-pays, orthotics, reading glasses, dental vision. All of these things aren't covered. So you want to make sure you have adequate coverage for your current health situation. And so you're not, running into a huge out-of-pocket cost.
Yeah, you end up buying the gap coverage to kind of fill the holes in the Swiss cheese analogy. I think that's a good one to. That's a good way to put it. That's a good analogy, Brian.
Yeah.
So I think hand in hand with the Medicare conversation, Social Security is going to tie in. Obviously, that's going to be a big piece of most people's retirement income. Hopefully, you're not counting on Social Security to replace all of your pre-retirement income, because as we all know, Social Security, just as a percentage of what you're making while you were working, it's significantly low. The reality is, though, I think for most of our clients, we're definitely encouraging that they wait till 70 to take Social Security. And the reason we do that is because there's an element of longevity risk. So if you think about health and wealth, obviously being in great health is a good thing, but it also means, hey, this person in great health is probably going to be living into their late 80s and 90s, right? If you think about it from an actuarial standpoint. So one of the things you can do to prevent that longevity risk, or that idea that, hey, you might actually outlive your retirement savings, you can obviously wait to take Social Security at 70. And the reason for that is you're locking in that monthly payment at the highest amount. And then that's what's obviously you're carrying through all the way into your 80s and 90s and beyond if you go that far. So maybe we're not telling everybody on the call, hey, you need to work until you're 70, but that's typically where we get into the cash flow planning side of the conversation. Let's look at other buckets of money. Maybe you've got some annuities or pensions that you could pull off, IRAs and 401ks, things of that nature to, bridge the gap, if you will, between when your retirement actually is and when we can take Social Security at 70. So just something to keep in mind. Again, everyone's numbers are a little bit different, and it is a case-by-case basis on when you take Social Security, but generally we're big fans of waiting until 70, because the last thing we want is a client calling us in their late 80s or 90s, or their kids calling us and saying, hey, mom and dad are out of money because, and the Social Security payment keeps coming in, but it was taken too early. So some food for thought there.
Yeah, and again, there's only two scenarios where I would tell a client typically to take pre-70. One is they're kind of forced retirement and they need the money to survive. That's an obvious. If you need the income and there's nowhere else to get it from, you have to do that. And number two is to Stuart's point, longevity. So if you take at say full retirement age versus 70, your break even of money in your pocket, assuming about a 3% cost of living adjustment, which is about what they put in the system every year, your break even is around age 78. So if you're entering retirement at 65 and you got a lot of things going on with your doctor and, all signs point to maybe a life expectancy of 75 max, that's a reason to take it early, unless possibly you have a spouse and your benefits way larger. because if something happens to you, then that larger amount will then switch to the spouse. But again, Stuart and I, and any good financial planner, we have Social Security analyzing software. We can punch in your numbers, run the reports, and you can see those buckets of, if I do it this way and I live to 80, what do I get? If I live to 85 and 90 and I do different scenarios, and that's really what ultimately helps a person make those final decisions.
Let's give a little bit of a let's call it a fixed income product update. Like, I know we've gotten a lot of questions, Brian, from clients that are trying to get out of old annuities. I just talked to another individual yesterday who had these old universal variable life type policies, purchased many years ago, and they just continue to be funding them at low interest rates. What's the interest rate environment with where it's at now? How does it play into somebody who's maybe looking to purchase one of these fixed income type products? Like, is now still a good time? I know rates are up, they've come down a little bit, but what are the conversations you're having with clients?
Yeah, well, let's give some fun facts. So you always want to follow the money. So in the highest interest rate environment in the last 23 years, the money has really flowed to banks and insurance companies, because banks and insurance companies are the only ones that provide products that really provide no risk of downside with some type of insurance protection, right? You got checking, bank money markets, CDs from the banks, and in the annuity world, you got fixed indexed annuities and fixed annuities, which, again, depending on which one you get, there can be zero negative market volatility risk in those things. So last year in annuities alone, I think it was like $386 billion went into them. To put that in perspective, for all the money that went into mutual funds and ETFs last year, and think of all the amount of money that people give from across the country in their 401ks every week, every Friday, that was $90 billion. So almost 4 times as much went into annuities last year. And again, I'm sure the numbers are somewhat similar about what went into CD products and money markets and high yield checking savings, because the rates were good. And they're still very good, and they're probably, from what the Fed's doing, going to remain good for at least a few more months. Like, I can tell you, a client came to me the other day with an annuity they bought years and years ago, and it was one of those annuities where it has roll-up income bases, and then when you get there, it's lifetime income based on a withdrawal band, but from the original contract. And the withdrawal band was 5% when they were 65, which in this case, the client was going to be 65 in 5 more years. We just shopped it over all the current ones, where now the withdrawal band for a 65-year-old couple is in the mid-6s. So they actually ate a little bit of a loss to switch it, but the new guarantees were going to pay them thousands of more dollars a year for the rest of their life, insured, guaranteed by the insurer, right? And the state and having the protection by the state. So reviewing any annuity products you have, very important. CDs, still very advantageous. Money markets, checking, high yield savings, that's still where the money's going. Obviously, people are still investing in the market, but in last year, when there was $400 billion put into these products, or almost $400 billion, it was, I think, 20% more than any of the previous year records in history into these accounts. But that's why. Same thing with the amount of money that have gone into CDs.
Yeah, and I mean, give a little bit of color. I mean, you touched on a little bit when you variable versus fixed products. I'm not a big fan of the variable products. I know we've talked about it in the past, especially right now with where the rate environment is. It doesn't really make sense in our mind to be in a variable product. With the market being up, with interest rates being up, it's typically a better time to be looking at fixed products with the guarantees that you're going to get. I mean, we're seeing 8 to 10% pretty much guaranteed increases on fixed products. And so the variables tend to not really outperform that when you factor in everything else that they're kind of taking from you. But I don't know, Brian, you can probably add a little color there.
Yeah, so I would say a couple things. So whenever you buy a stock, a bond, a mutual fund, an ETF, an ETN, you have zero assurances or insurances of what that investment will become in a day, a year, 10 years, right? It's all conjecture based on historical hypotheticals and, what the manager's doing with your money, right? There's no assurances there. So for the last 23 years, especially retirees who clearly obviously want more safety than someone like myself or someone that's 25 years old, it's a very advantageous time for them to get into these kind of fixed products, because those kinds of folks, they want at least some of their money in investments that have assurances and insurances and protections. So, I mean, that just is what it is, right? If you're entering retirement, you have $1 million in a stock portfolio, and you need 50 grand a year out of that portfolio, and everything in there is stocks. That's probably not a good idea, right? We enter into a 2008, a 2001, a World War III, whatever kind of bubble that tips the market. That $1 million could easily go to 600. And then we're back to work, and we didn't want to be, and then it just, things get very messy. So it's all about putting the right pieces in place for the plan. But now that pre-retirees and retirees have this interest rate environment, that's again, you're seeing so much money go into them because the baby boomers that are retiring now at, I don't know what it is, I think 10,000 a clip. There's a lot of money that is looking to be invested in those kind of products.
Yeah, I think it's one of those things where a lot of people, kind of like the mortgage environment. Like, I talk to people once in a while who just are still sitting in a 5 or 6% mortgage. They never refinanced it during COVID, and that's one of the things that we talked to a lot of people about. Is hopefully you noticed that, hey, this is a big opportunity. Rates went to zero. Like, let me refinance my debt where I'm at a lower interest rate. It's very similar when you get into the insurance space. If you're in one of these types of products, you want to almost refi it and now lock in a higher payment amount, or at least explore the open market and kind of where things are at. So, don't be asleep at the wheel on stuff like this. A lot of times it's easy to just think, hey, I purchased this, I have this product, and I've been putting money into it, or I see the value going up. But just be aware that the guarantees are just a lot higher now than they were even a few years ago. And so it makes sense to just take a deep dive, look at the policy, get with a planner to see, okay, what did I purchase this at? What is the market like today? And almost refinance that policy when rates are up. So that's something that Brian and I have done for a lot of people. Obviously, you can just reach out to us at the My Planning WellCents if you wanted to get some more due diligence performed on what you're working with currently. Had a couple questions come in. I think they're good ones. It kind of ties into the consolidation piece. So had somebody ask about multiple retirement plans from old employers. I know we touched on it earlier, but consolidation really is the way to go. I mean, the reality is if you have too many buckets of money, it's really hard to keep track of where everything's at. So we're big proponents of consolidating into either your most current retirement plan where you're working, or be exploring IRA options, especially if you're near retirement. So get that more customized approach. Oftentimes we can add in more unique asset classes and tie it into the planning conversation in an IRA versus what we have access to in a corporate sponsored retirement plan. So IRAs can make a lot of sense for some people. What other questions we got in here, Brian, that we want to get to? I know we've got another 10 minutes or so.
Piggybacking that a little bit. Yeah, we get this question a lot. 401ks are very what's called, I call them very equity centric. So the average 401k in the country has about 40 mutual fund options inside of it. There's about, I think, 6,000 or 7,000 mutual funds that exist. So if you look at the lineup of 40, probably 90% of them are stock centric, right? So they're equity based, and then you might have a couple bond fund options, maybe one or two safe fixed account options. So 401ks are very limited, but for most people that are investing for 40 years, being in the stock market and taking part in corporate profits, that's fine. But once you get to age 50, 55, 60, that's where, especially if you have old accounts, by getting into an IRA, you're not limited anymore. So you can get anything you want in the tens of thousands of investment products that exist to choose from. And then 401k, 403bs, they're very good growers. For a whole multitude of reasons, they're not very good withdrawers. So getting them into the IRA space, there's a lot more options as far as, I can make sure I grab from certain assets a little bit more effectively. If the market's down, I can turn on my dividends or my rental income, if you will, to collect the money in cash, where you can't do that in 401k and mutual funds. So it provides you more abilities. If you're nearing retirement the next 10 years and you have old accounts, 99 times out of 100, I think Stuart and I would agree, we'd shoot you to IRAs. If you're 25, 30, 40 years old and you got some old IRAs and or old employer plans and they're smaller, rolling them over to your current one's probably just fine. It's just a matter of having someone like Stuart or myself look at it.
Yeah, it's kind of that accumulation versus decumulation. We're big proponents of the accumulation phase. like getting a lot of the upside early on in retirement, but oftentimes 401ks are not the most efficient decumulation vehicle when you look at the ability to make trades, kind of dynamically manage the different investments. So yeah, we're happy to have that conversation with you. Let's talk a little bit. We had a good question come in. IUL policies. I mean, what's your take on that, Brian?
Well, I can tell you, every time I log on to my social media websites, I'm trying to get sold one. That makes you feel better. I mean, every time I log in and I'm on Instagram or something, just scrolling in a plane or train, trying to kill some time. Every other ad is, someone trying to sell you an IUL policy, and it's better than a bank, and it's better for retirement income. It depends who you talk to, right? You could sit in front of you could call 100 certified financial planners with blemish-free FINRA records like Stuart and I have, and probably get, people on, for, against, or neutral on the scenario. So again, the cliche that it depends on the situation, but an IUL, just high level, is an indexed universal life insurance product. So it's a life insurance product, and basically inside of it, you're allowed to invest in the indexes like the S&P 500, and normally there's a cap on what you can get. And just like any insurance product, if you bought one in a low interest rate environment, they're typically not very good. If you buy them right now, they're typically usually better than they were 4 or 5 years ago. But they also, and I can tell you this from being in the business, and again, we're fully independent. So, well, I'll talk about that fiduciary thing in a minute because I think that's important. But if you buy an IUL, and let's say the S&P 500 cap is 8%, meaning that if the S&P goes up 10, you'll get 8% inside of the account. All these insurance companies and these contracts you buy are this thick. So they all gotta have clauses. Oh, well, we can raise the fee to this inside the contract if we want to. We can lower that 8% cap to 5% cap, and we can really pull some levers to protect ourselves if our books don't look as good as we thought they would in years going forward. So, like a good independent advisor, we will look at the contracts and know what the minimums are of what the insurance company can do to you, because that's important. But they have their place. I'm not saying they're bad, but if you're buying them purely for investment and you're not maxing out your 401k and IRAs and other things first, that's typically a problem. And at the end of the day, it's still a life insurance product. So you're paying increasing cost of insurance as your age gets older inside of the account. So if you don't need life insurance, if that's covered elsewhere, there's probably better things you can do for pure investment from a tax advantageous standpoint, which is a good selling point of IULs. It just, again, depends on the situation of the person or couple.
And remember, I mean, there's a lot of bad actors in the industry. I mean, that's something, I don't know, we don't talk about it a lot, but there's a lot of people that have licenses. That doesn't mean that they're great advisors or giving you independent fiduciary advice. They're just salespeople. So right. You have to be really careful. I mean, I don't think, Brian, you and I are probably savvy enough to not be buying policies off of a social media ad, but right. There are a lot of people that are taking advantage of this. They end up reaching out. They're working with a salesperson, not a planner who's actually, conducting some due diligence on their financial situation. It's a one-time sale, and then that person they're never going to hear from again. So just making sure that if something like an insurance product, an IUL, even an annuity is a fit, it's being part of that broader planning conversation. Like that's the attention to detail that you want before you go down this road, because it is a product.
Yeah, I can tell you that the industry, in the financial industry, I don't think there's anyone out there who thinks everything done in the financial industry is on the up and up. Right? It's the financial industry. We're talking about money here, and there's always going to be bad actors in the financial industry. And the big thing in the last 5-10 years is there's consistently new fiduciary regulations that come out to protect the client, right? So there's new Department of Labor fiduciary rule coming out here shortly. There was a best interest rule last year, a marketing rule. And everyone's kind of a lot of the population is learning about what a fiduciary is and to ask the financial planner if they're a fiduciary. But truly what a fiduciary means is they have to do what's in your best interest, just as like they would do it just as if you were them or they were your parents or whatever, right? But a lot of these advisors hold themselves out as fiduciaries, but their broker dealer or their RIA gives them a limited shelf of what they can, in essence, show you as far as product is concerned. And that's a big contention, at least for me personally, that they're really not truly a fiduciary unless they're saying, hey, like let's say I work at Northwest Mutual and here's all the products I have to give you, but I am a fiduciary and I do know there's something better. I'm going to tell you about that and let you know and let you make that educated decision. And if obviously it's way better, like I run into that sometimes myself where we're hampered sometimes on certain products with the bureaucracy of what we do. And I know there's something, which is not often, but there's a product that's with a good carrier that I don't have access to. I will tell the client this and refer them to the place they can get it. Because that's ultimately what we're here to do, right? Is to do what's best for our clients in any given situation. But the reality is that a lot of people that have a financial advisor don't realize or know beyond them saying they're a fiduciary that there are limitations from what they can give you. And that's where sometimes people end up getting hurt because they're not getting the best fit for their situation.
Yeah, I think that's really good advice, Brian. Probably, honestly, a good segue to really wrap up here. And just ultimately, we want to thank everybody for your time, for your attending. We say at every call, your time is your most valuable asset. So we do appreciate you spending some of it with us. Hopefully it was valuable. You learned something. The goal here is to give you some fun facts, obviously some things going on in the market, but also hopefully give you some ideas and things you can do to more effectively manage your financial situation. It's some inside baseball, I think, like is what our goal is to show you a little bit behind the curtain and the industry in and of itself, and just some things that you can maybe ask your advisor if you're already working with somebody. Like these are good questions to ask your advisor and just good things to think about before you actually execute on some of those big financial decisions that you might come across. So again, as we wrap up here, just did want to reiterate for those of you that might have joined and didn't hear it at the top of the hour, if you're looking for those wellness points from your organization for attending the show today, just make sure you complete the WellCents Show survey that's going to be sent out after we log out here today, and then use that employee passphrase empowered. That's empowered to get that credit. So thanks everybody for your time. We love spending an hour with you, and hopefully we hear from a lot of you. I see some people scanning the QR codes. Feel free to reach out anytime, and we're happy to help you out with your unique situation. Brian, any final thoughts from you before we close here?
Well, just to reiterate what Stuart just said, I mean, we're here as a resource, an unbiased, independent resource, and if Stuart and I don't know the answer, we can certainly get you to someone who has the answer. So utilize our knowledge and expertise and what we do all day, every day, just like we would do it from you guys with what you guys do every day. So we're here when we need you, or we're here when you need us, and we're looking forward to seeing you in a couple months for second quarter.
Thanks, everybody.